Welcome to the Big Ben Show with me, Lester Holloway, and fellow presenter Alex Watson. Obviously, we're talking about politics, UK politics after the excitement of the Nigerian elections, which was, of course, extremely comprehensively covered here on Ben Television. I'm sure that you didn't miss it at all. And, of course, I was following it avidly, both on the TV and also online as well. And the amount of times that Nigerians gave praise to God for the safe and fair elections, I absolutely lost count of that. And of course, congratulations to Muhammadu Buhari winning at the fourth time of asking. I'm sure that his prayers have eventually been answered, but the law took a little while to answer that. Obviously, joined as always by Alex. How are you doing, Alex?
I'm not too bad, actually. I'm good, thank you.
Okay.
Lester?
And of course, the debates happening tonight in UK politics with the 7 party leaders. So perhaps this might be, there's so many leaders, it could be a bit of a borathon.
Perhaps, yeah. Well, they've got David Cameron.
He's right at the end.
Right, okay. And what time is it? I should know this.
Oh, I think it's 7 o'clock, but
okay.
I'll check on that if I've given the
well, if they're
wrong time there.
If they're on usual form, I'm sure it's going to be a borathon.
Okay, but it's far from a borathon here because we're going to be having a little bit of a Lib Dem special, I guess.
Yes.
And of course, the Lib Dems have been trailing in the opinion polls for a little while now. The last poll of polls put the Lib Dems at 8%, but they've been between 6 and 8%. So perhaps a little way to go. We'll find out.
What were the Lib Dems before the last election?
Well, at the last election, they were 23%,
right.
and the election before that, I think they were 25 or 26%. So a little bit of a gap there. But we'll be talking to Tina Lashmore, who's the prospective parliamentary candidate for the Lib Dems, oh, there she is, for the Bethnal Green and Bow, and also later on to the Lib Dem candidate for Camberwell and Peckham, Yahaya Kiyingi, who's also been tipped for great things in his political career. Welcome, Tina, to the show.
Thanks, Lester.
And you're standing in Bethnal Green and Bow.
Yes, Tower Hamlets.
In Tower Hamlets, yes, often in the news. How are you finding it so far?
Well, I'm really quite lucky because Tower Hamlets is quite close to home, so it's the next borough over. And I generally do quite a lot of work there anyway, so nipping in and out of Tower Hamlets. It's been interesting, the campaign that we're running. There's me, there's Elaine Bagshaw also for Limehouse and Poplar, and doing quite a lot. We've been involved in the couple of photo shoots locally around women wrongly imprisoned. That was the first one that we did.
What are the big issues in Tower Hamlets?
The big issues, London generally, housing. NHS does come up, but I think housing is definitely the biggest issue. There's a massive development at the edge of Tower Hamlets and Hackney, where the Mayor of Hackney has articulated his dissatisfaction because of the high rise. And interestingly, I agree with him in terms of the height of the development.
Okay. Well, we don't want to get too local because some of the people who live around there may know exactly what you're talking about, but others won't. We'll go back to housing a little later on, but just to look at national politics at the moment. Yeah. Nick Clegg saying today on TV the era of single-party government is over. This is something he's apparently going to be talking about tonight in the leaders' debate. Does this mean that he's effectively depressing the nation? That the era of having a single party in government, many people want that. Opinion polls have been showing that a lot of people want a clear outcome in this election, and Nick Clegg is saying to them, "You can't have it."
Well, I think that's just how I think it's a lot to do with how the media frame the stories, quite a lot of the times. And I think people do like clarity. I'm not saying that they don't. But in this election, had we had clarity, in this parliament, had we had clarity, that would have been completely conservative policies running the country for the last 4 years. And I feel the pressure from the coalition policies. And my view is, had they been conservative on their own, I think they would have been more difficult to be living here.
Yeah, actually thinking about that, because we spoke just a while ago about the Lib Dems having gone down in the opinion polls massively, because Nick Clegg performed really well in the leaders' debates, and I think that really boosted boosted the Lib Dems vote at the last minute. So in terms of what you've just said, do you think that with party politics, well, being part of a coalition, like you said, it's been challenging, but perhaps if it was only a Conservative government, things would be far, far worse. So what do you see on the pipeline for after May then, and how might it work if we have like maybe a split between Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dem, or maybe not UKIP, perhaps?
Yeah, it's quite frightening to think. It is quite, for me personally, obviously I've got my personal views, and I feel that UKIP anywhere near leadership of the country, for me personally, would be very difficult. However, there are supporters out there who believe in UKIP and who believe in the values of UKIP, and they quite rightly would want to champion that political party. I think for Lib Dems, they, as a consequence of going into coalition, they have lost a lot of support internally, because I'm only in the party for a couple of years. I go through the values of Lib Dems, and then I see something that's released, which like a policy that's released, and I feel that that's, for example, the bedroom tax, the spare room subsidy. Sorry to go back onto housing, but when that was released, I felt that was really quite contrary to Lib Dem values. It was a blunt instrument, but as a consequence of that, a process then kicked in. So it was a Conservative policy. The Lib Dems, because they're in coalition, yes, they've enacted it. But what the Lib Dems also did was, as far as I understand it, they sponsored a research project into, which was released in Haringey, and it looked at the benefits and the losses of that policy, and it came back to the table, and it was proven to be too blunt an instrument. So in that sense, in terms of a coalition working, if you have a single party, you're never going to have that redress. But in a coalition, it seems as though if you do implement something in a coalition and it's not right, then the party can go off and do...
But you still need the numbers, though, don't you? Even if the Conservatives were in government and they decided they want to push certain things through, they still need to put it to the House and get... Obviously, if they've got a majority, then it's easier for them to push things through, but then they still need the consensus, or am I getting something wrong there? They can't just...
It's not that they need the... no, they have the consensus at that moment, because that's I guess that's the devil of coalition, but what you also have is the opportunity to then go away and review that, because you have two different parties who have two different values. For example, if it was reversed and the Conservatives didn't like it, they could have gone away and reviewed that policy and come back and said, okay, we want to challenge it and modify it, and that has been able to happen because the Lib Dems did go away and either they commissioned the research or they've taken the research which was already in process, and because a lot of people in the community were, very much against, and also a lot of
probably
people
suffering
in the
from
party were also not particularly keen on it either. So, but in terms of a policy that's got to go through, it's gone through, but then there's this caveat that it's going to be reviewed, and as a consequence, that has happened. I don't think you generally get that when it's a single party, because obviously a single party is unified in their policies. These are two parties; they're not unified in their policies, and there is some sort of caveat in there to have redress about that.
Well, would you welcome another coalition with the Conservatives after May?
I'm not in position to. Personally, I can answer that personally.
Yes.
No, I would not. I feel the austerity, for me, the austerity strategy that's been applied. Some of it has been, some of it I can see the benefit of, and I'm not saying that the Conservatives have got it 100% wrong, but I do think, for me, if I was judging it, I'd think about 75% wrong.
Gazing into crystal ball, and some polls have been indicating this might be an outcome of the election. The Conservatives slightly ahead in a number of seats, a bit like last time around. They would need to either govern themselves, perhaps, as a minority government, getting all their Conservative policies through, or join up once again with the Lib Dems as a sort of modifying influence on them. Would you, this time around, prefer the Lib Dems leave the Tories well alone?
I think I think that there's just been a conference. I think, as far as I can recall, because I wasn't actually at the conference, I think there's a realisation that that could happen. I personally would find it very, very difficult because of the strategy that the Conservatives, or their manifesto, for example, which is their strategy, they've released that, and it's quite clear that austerity for them is here to stay. And it is quite clear that the Lib Dem strategy is slightly less. So for me, it's slightly better.
Labour are also promising austerity as well. Perhaps, you know, they will extend the borrowing limit, so there may be less austerity, but we're still getting austerity. So if you're going to be in government after the next election, obviously, you know, the party nationally, you're going to have to link up with one of the austerity parties.
But also, it might be that another party has to also link up. So it might be a broader coalition. So it may well be that, for example, I'm not entirely sure how the mechanisms work, but there's no reason why I can't see that Greens could not be part of the Lib Dems and Conservative coalition. Some of the Green strategies or their aspirations, they chime quite closely with some Lib Dem. They don't chime very much with Conservative, but you know, there is some correlation there, so that could be desirable.
I'm just taking away from that, but it just came to me. I'm thinking about things like the Chilcot inquiry that have been postponed until perhaps after the election, because and a lot of people are saying it's not been done before the election because it could have such a massive impact. But none of us can look into the future. But I wonder how you feel what will be revealed in things like Chilcot and the CSA inquiry are going to affect any coalition government that may be there post May.
For me, I'm opposed to not releasing reports. I think that's part of the issue with politics, is the idea that we have to hold things back from the people. I think a report is there, the evidence is there, the facts are there. They're not going to change over time, and the only reason it's being held back is to save face of politics. And I personally feel that's not why I'm in politics. I make mistakes, and I will make mistakes, and I hope I always step up to the plate and accept my punishment if I've made mistakes. And I don't at any point want to be holding back on anything that I've done wrong until somebody feels comfortable. I think the British public are fed up with that, and I feel that's a negative side of politics. In terms of which party will come out on a plus or a minus in terms of these inquiries,
it seems like there's implications all over the shop, you know, so I don't think anyone's going to kind of get... I mean, in terms of Chilcot, yes, it seems like maybe perhaps Tony Blair and George Bush may have, you know, a lot to answer for, and a lot that's going to be redacted. But in terms of this other inquiry, the child abuse inquiry, which I've been keenly watching, it seems like, you know, we've had MPs like Cyril Smith, who was a Lib Dem, and it seems like it's been across the board. And the suppression of this information, I think you're right, people are fed up. But I'd be interested to know what made you, in light of all these things, join the Lib Dems now. And two years ago, you said it's the values, but they're not...
So it's the values that I read are today. These events that we're talking about are in the past, and they are in the context. They're in the context of the 60s and 70s, the revolution, the sexual revolution, for example. My reading of history, especially when I'm reading back on these sexual offending, for example, is there was a very strong debate of accepting this behaviour, that, you know, having sex with children was somehow okay. Now, I personally...
But there was also, you know, when I was...
I just wanted to put that into a context.
I was too young at the time,
yeah.
you know,
well,
to be around. But, you know, as I understand it, you know, yes, there was this, you know, movement among some people to, you know, open that whole debate up. But others were standing very much against it at the time.
Yeah.
That, you know, there was a strong feeling at the time, like there is today, that this... You know, that you know, that kind of contact with minors is absolutely unacceptable and abhorrent. So the fact that you had these sexual abuse situations going on, they knew it was wrong.
And the thing is, it's like what's happening now. I mean, the inquiry. It seems from an outsider's perspective of somebody that's not, you know, as interested in politics, but doesn't have, you know, the inside track, that it's a lot about protectionist of politicians themselves, and they're meant to be there to represent us. but it seems like they're protecting themselves, and I suppose that's the nature of a criminal, to protect themselves. But it's like, from the public's point of view, a lot of people are apathetic, but then there's a whole group of people that are absolutely seething about this.
No, I agree, because I'm one of the people who's seething about it.
Yeah.
And although I'm in a political party, I'm late to the table. And as I said, I come to the party based on the principles and the values that I read today. However, the past behaviours, I struggle with it. I struggle with the fact that the law that we had back then was slightly different to the one that we have today, and as a consequence of that, when we're sentencing today, you know, generally these offenders are sentenced less harshly than if they committed these behaviours today. Generally, not in every case, generally speaking. And I agree with you, because I am also part of the public. I am exhausted at the amount that we do in protecting ourselves. And I think, again, that gives politics a bad name. It detracts from the good things that people do in politics. I would love to think most people come into politics because they want to do something positive. However, they also come with their own personal baggage, and some of that baggage is that they do wrong.
Yeah.
And all of us do wrong at times, but some of us transcend the sort of social norms quite frequent. And you know, and as a party, I've got to say, me only being in this party for 2 years, there are internal processes which I'm actually I've been involved with, and actually I think holding ourselves to account and holding ourselves to a higher test is quite important. And I think if we don't do that within ourselves, then what do we expect from society when they see these behaviours splashed over the front of the newspapers?
Okay. Can I just move debate on slightly?
Yeah.
Sorry.
What are the... it's absolutely fine. Tina, what pitch are the Lib Dems offering black and particularly African communities going into this election?
I think as a party, it's the only party which has been open from the outset to migration. There are benefits to migration. There are massive benefits to migration, and quite often...
Well, the Greens want an even more open-door policy than the Lib Dems.
Sorry?
So if you
The
want
Greens.
to... The Green Party.
Yeah. So in terms of...
they're calling for no restrictions whatsoever.
Yeah, I think it's sort of No Borders, which is a fantastic book if you ever get to read it, because it does articulate quite clearly the green agenda. For me, as a party that is in coalition at the moment, so it's in a leadership position at the moment, whereas the other parties are in opposition, and that's fantastic for all involved. There's a history here. There's a history of black, African, Asian communities, and I separate those out in terms of other ethnic minorities, because there's been a strong history of racism in the country. As a party that accepts people's histories, and that their histories may not originate or initially originate from the UK, as the values of the Lib Dems are there. They do not discriminate against anybody from where they come from. You are eligible to apply to the party and participate in party politics.
So in other senses, the Lib Dems are less racist towards black communities than other parties.
No, I wasn't going to say they're less racist. I'm going to say their values and their values, the purity of their values, I would say yes. However, the practice, which requires human beings, and that's us, that's where we fall down. As a Lib Dem party, that's where we fall down, because we need to do more. I need to do more. I need to go out there and embrace people in my community, in my immediate community and further afield, and actually explain to them how they can participate. Despite the walls that are there and the challenges are there, by coming together and joining together, we can actually overcome them.
But if the Lib Dems' values towards black communities are so pure, as you put it, then why do the Lib Dems have no black or ethnic minority MPs?
Because you can have the statement, so you can have the value, which is like a mission statement. You then need the leadership to carry that into the communities, and then you need to be able to reflect that in the communities as well, and that's where it struggled. So when I say in its purest sense it's open, I'm talking about its mission statement, its mission values, its framework. Its framework, if you like. Its business organised framework is open. However, the leadership, and how does that leadership carry forward? So how do we get Nick Clegg to come down into some of our communities where you know, for me, I'm quite fortunate. I mix into different communities, different languages, and some of our leaders do pick up different languages. But how do we get them?
But they don't seem they don't seem to really have an interest. That's what it seems like.
But then that's why when I'm engaging with people and I'm saying, look, politics, choosing a political party to take forward something that you believe in is only half the step. If everybody, for example, let's do it in plain English. If every black and ethnic minority person in London joined one political party, they would change the policies of that political party. Because they would then be the voting, at those conferences, they would be the people voting through those policies. So they would change that political party. Then you've got to weigh that up against how big the party is. So when I look at Labour, for example, I think their membership is like 135,000 people. So you've got to, if you want to change policy, you've either got to convince 135,000 people to change a policy, or you've got to bring to the table another 135,000 people to get a debate. Now, taking that mechanism and looking at the Lib Dems, well, Lib Dems have got a membership of about 45,000 people. So you've got less people to convince. So if London alone decided, actually, we want policies that are more reflective of everyday people, and I consider myself everyday people. I go to work for a living, I struggle to pay my bills like most people that I meet. And that's what I mean by everyday people. If we want those policies, choosing a party on its own isn't going to get those policies. So if everybody joined at one moment in time, you would then change those internal policies.
So I might support one party or other at election time, but in terms of joining, I have never actually done that. And what's the difference between having tacit support and actually, you know, practically joining a party? What difference does that make for an individual?
So joining a party means that you, for me, especially around housing, for example, and criminal justice, two areas that are quite passionate to me, I then have an opportunity to debate, if you like to call it, or I'd like to call it fight, fight my peers to change policy.
Right.
So when it came to housing, for example, I've been writing about housing for the last 5 years. It affects my day job. I work with a lot of people who come out of custody, trying to get them housed. You know, it's very difficult.
What is your day job?
So I work in probation rehabilitation services.
Right.
I fight very much to get people housed. So the expansion of private renters, I've seen the downside of that.
Impact.
So when I went to political parties and asked them what they were doing, I looked at their housing policy. I thought, okay, I need to fight a bit harder. I've got to do something more. So I thought, well, I need to choose a party that I'm going to have an impact. So if I was to join the Labour Party, for example, I would have to convince 135,000 people.
Right.
And as much as I may find some allies, I'm not going to do that in a short space of time.
So it's quite a calculated process.
Yeah,
in terms of looking at the demographic, looking at the reach, looking at a bit of the values, looking at what is you're trying to get from it and what you're trying to bring to it, and then making a kind of informed decision, saying out of this is the. Because
all political parties are doing the same thing. They are running the country and they've got a set of tools to run it. It's just how they prioritise.
Okay.
And that's the difference.
Just before we come to the the end of this segment with Tina, as I mentioned in the introduction, the Lib Dems started out in 2010 at 23%. You're now down to 7 or 8% in the opinion polls, a massive decrease. Does this mean the Lib Dems are no longer relevant in the same way?
I don't think it's no longer relevant, and I think some of the polls are actually demonstrating people's raw feelings. And I think it's good, because I think it's, you know...
Raw feelings about what?
Raw feelings about how our country is at the moment. And
a protest against the government? It's
not just... It's saying that they are unhappy with the way things are running. You know, housing...
So they're unhappy with the government, is what you're saying?
But
I'm saying...
Conservatives didn't go down that much, and Labour hasn't necessarily gone down that much, but the Lib Dems, from 23% to 8%, that is a massive kind of Lib Dems, you've let us down.
There is, because it's a huge shift. You've got to realise there's a shift around the student fees and the loss of face there, and despite the apology, as a political party, that we have done quite a lot of work in terms of trying to explain the mitigation around that. I don't think we've been as successful, and I also study, so I have to pay those student fees as well. And it's not really working on me either in terms of the mitigation. So
Exactly.
we have to do more. We have to do more. And for me,
But
again,
the
I go
question
back into the party. Sorry,
is
can I
whether
just finish this point?
Yes.
I go back into the party and say, no, we have to do more. So I don't just accept that this is our policy. Oh, well, we have to live with it. No, I turn around and I go into my party and say, no, it's not enough. We need to do more. So I read those opinion polls and it has an effect on me. It has an emotional impact on me. And I take that energy and turn it into the party and fight.
Okay. Now, obviously, you know, the Lib Dems need to do more, which is what you're saying, to connect with the public.
Yes.
But the question that I asked you is whether the Lib Dems are becoming less relevant because their standing in the opinion polls is so much more reduced.
I think that's a very tricky question. I'm sorry I misunderstood it the first time.
Okay.
Well, you may have a point. You may have a point.
I wasn't quite
End of
expecting that
conversation.
answer from a prospective parliamentary candidate. I think that's
no,
a new
no,
one
you may
already.
have a point, and I have to acknowledge that you know you may have a point. I feel that in my communication out in the community, those opinion polls aren't going to be reflected on the 7th of May.
They're not going to be reflected.
No.
Because there's what?
Because there's more
variation.
communication. My communication in the areas that I'm working in is more positive. For example, I was on one of those cheap flights the other day, and interestingly enough, I sat next to people who were Tower Hamlets and Hackney. I'm not quite sure if the airline set that up, but anyway, the people on that plane, they talked about the fact that the only people who've been knocking on their door have been Lib Dems, and for that reason, despite what, the challenges that face Lib Dems and you know the decisions around student fees, etc., they're going to support Lib Dem. So so the idea that the opinion polls are going down, the people are still saying, well, the people knocking on my door in my neighbourhood are Lib Dems.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, we've come to the end of that segment. Thank you so much for joining us, Tina.
Thank you.
Lashmore, Lib Dem candidate in Bethnal Green and Bow. Thank you for coming on the show. After the break, we'll be talking to another Lib Dem. We've got a bit of a Liberal Democrat special here, or Liberal Democat, according to the news this week, where Joey Essex of The Only Way is Essex decided to go along to a Lib Dem press conference and met, of course, Nick Clegg. We won't necessarily be going into to that one, but we'll be talking about other issues to do with the Lib Dems after the break with Yahya Kiyingi, who's a Ugandan-born Liberal Democrat activist and candidate in the election in Camberwell and Peckham. So join us after the break. Okay.
Own your own business. Do you want to expand your network and increase your sales? Well, advertise your services with us here on Ben Television. Ben Television Sky 182. We are here to showcase you and promote you to our diverse viewers. Call us now on 0208 808 8800 or email us at bentelevisionuk@gmail.com. We are here to serve you.
Welcome back to the Big Ben Show with me, Lester Holloway, and Alex Watson. Talking everything Lib Dem today, we had before the break Tina Lashmore from Bethnal Green and Bow. And if you've got any views about the issues we're discussing, then do call into the studio. You can put your questions to us and my new guest that will be joining me in just a minute. The number will be coming up on the screen shortly. It's 0208 808 0693, and that number will be on your screens shortly. I'm joined now in the studio by the Lib Dem candidate for Camberwell and Peckham, Yahya Kiyingi. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, you're taking on Harriet Harman of Labour, Labour's deputy leader. That's quite a challenge.
Absolutely, it's a challenge, but it's something that's I feel like it's worthwhile to do, to put yourself at the forefront of serving your community. And you know, I'm ready for it.
Okay, so how are you going to bring her down?
I mean, I'm not trying to fight to bring
Oh, you're fighting to lose.
bring her down. I'm fighting to make a point, and to put my views on the decision table and to put it out there for the people of Camberwell and Peckham.
Okay. And what do you think are the main things why you've stood and what has she done wrong, and what do you want to improve?
I mean, I'm standing because I've got a real sense, first and foremost, of serving my community. I mean, I've come from a community just like Camberwell and Peckham, sort of coming from a very working class family, having been homeless at one point, being raised by a single mother. A lot of the issues that I feel passionate about are issues that are so prevalent in that constituency. I mean, Camberwell and Peckham is one of the most deprived constituencies in the country. And so that passion has driven me to put myself forward in that kind of environment, in that kind of community, because I know that I've got the drive, the passion for that community. I just feel like, you know, Harriet Harman has been in the seat for so long and not much has improved. It's still one of the most deprived constituencies in the country.
So she's kind of taking the constituency for granted.
That's what it feels like, and that's what I think people in Camberwell and Peckham feel at the moment. I do feel she has taken it for granted because, you know, in a period of almost 30 years, you know, there must have been some kind of improvements, and not much can be said for what's happening in Camberwell and Peckham.
So do you think that, I mean, is she standing, she's still standing, or is she going to be standing
again,
down?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so what kind of things would you like to improve then? I mean, if we could get Harriet on at some point, it would be awesome, because we can get her to kind of respond to some of these challenges. But what kind of things would you see need to improve in your area?
I mean, for me, one of the main, I feel the major part of what's going on, I think, and this is South London-wide and Southwark-wide, I would say, is the gentrification of the area. Now, as a Liberal, I'm not against the development of our communities. I think that's great. Development is great, and to see people, you know, building our communities and making them better is great. But at the same time, there's people who have laid their foundations in these communities for so many years. You know, some people that was the first place they got to when they came in the country, and in a constituency like Camberwell and Peckham, where you've got a large amount of Afro-Caribbeans and Africans living there. It was the first community they set root.
African communities are being pushed out.
They're being pushed out, and that's what we see.
So what can be done specifically? Because obviously when it comes to the election, we all want to know what the detail of the policies are. What specifically needs to happen to stop that you know, movement of black communities out of the area?
I mean, that particular issue is something that has more to do with what Labour-run Southwark Council has done, which is when Liberal Democrats had control of the council, we used to have a certain percentage of housing that was set aside for local people, so social housing. That has been that used to be ring fence. That ring fence is, you know, that safeguard is no longer there at the moment as it stands. I would like to see for every new build in the community that a certain amount is set aside for local people.
And what should that be? I mean, do you have an idea or a percentage in your head as to, say a block is being built, a new block, what percentage really should be social housing?
I mean, personally, I think I would say a third would be a reasonable amount, because I mean these are communities that are owned by the people, and at the same time I do understand, you know, when these are people's. I mean, building housing and infrastructure is not something that is cheap or anything like that, but it is still at the heart of the community. Housing is part of the community, and I think a third of units built for local people.
So talking about going back to Harriet Harman a bit, I mean, obviously she's a woman, she's a high-profile woman in politics, and without trying to put words into your mouth, it just came to me. Do you think that she spent this last amount of time kind of building her own career as opposed to serving her community? Because she's done quite well out of it, hasn't she?
And absolutely. I mean, now, and look, I don't want to undermine the work that she has done. As a woman, she has represented women, and there is a underrepresentation of women in Parliament, and she has, she has done her part in sort of helping to change the face of Parliament. But at the same time, comes to a point where you no longer look at the sort of the facade and sort of the symbolism. You have to look at the work that person has put into the community. 30 years is a long time for someone to have done some kind of or have made some kind of progress in the community. And so, without undermining her work as a female in Parliament, I do want to stress sort of it's about the impact that she has made in the community, in the constituency that she represents.
Absolutely. Just turning our attention more now to national politics. A poll came out yesterday from Lord Ashcroft, who is a Conservative donor and peer, although he's retiring as a Lord. But he does a lot of polling, and he did polls in several Lib Dem seats, including Nick Clegg's seat. And you've probably seen the headlines this morning that it's actually showing that Labour is in a 2% lead in Sheffield Hallam, which is Nick Clegg's constituency. How do you feel about the idea of losing your leader?
Look, I mean,
not too bothered by
I mean, I don't pay much attention to polls.
I'm sure Clegg
because
is.
I mean, well, that's to be honest, at the moment I haven't really had the chance to look around what's going on around me. There's so much going on in my own constituency. A lot of work that a lot of ground that I have to cover, in Campbell and Peckham, that, the polls and what's happening around the country with different constituencies.
But it was an extraordinary poll because what the poll showed is that Labour was slightly ahead, but the contact rate, which is the amount of, the percentage of times that local residents have been contacted by each party, they've been contacted, I think 75% of Sheffield Hallam have been contacted by the Lib Dems, which is vastly more than anywhere else in the country. So clearly a lot of resources are going in to trying to get Nick Clegg to survive this election, but yet Labour are ahead. I mean, what does that say about the Lib Dems if they can't, if they're on a knife edge in Nick Clegg's own constituency?
Look, it's hard. I'm not. As you can tell, I'm not trying to defend sort of the polls or try to argue against them. What they reflect is sort of the the disenchantment of people from the party and politics. I think things will change. Things will improve. I feel that. But at the same time, sort of, I'm really not caught up in what's going on in Clegg's constituency, because I feel he'll make it through.
I kind of feel that, like I said it when Tina was on, he did so well in the last leadership debates, and he's been doing Call Clegg on LBC for the last, and none of these things are helping him, and it will be interesting to see how he performs in the leadership debates, because I think people feel disingenuous about him, and I don't know how you feel about him as party leader, but it seems like, you'd think that him being on the radio every week would kind of have raised his profile or endeared people to him more, but it has seemed to have done absolutely nothing for his popularity.
I mean, all the three major parties. I mean, I don't think this is an isolated thing. I mean, a lot of people try to say, try to point out, I guess because I'm a Liberal Democrat at the moment. Well, people try to say, Nick Clegg or, Nick Clegg is people aren't catching on to him. But I think it's all three of the Labour, all three of the leaders. It's not about the leaders. It's about politics. And I feel personally. I'm of the view that the party, does need to resell itself to the
So
public.
do you think
Retell
maybe it
them
was
what-
like you, Chukwuta Muna and Sean Bailey or something that would be a bit... Let's make it happen, people.
Please not Sean Bailey. I want to, no offence, Sean. You're very welcome on the show. I wanted to ask you, Yahya, the same question which I asked Tina, which is, what are the Lib Dem